I want you all to listen carefully also, because listening is very important. Whatever we listen, that goes inside into our mind, and then that never goes out. So, of course, reading is also important, but then
Hello, ma'am. Please unmute your mic. Hello, ma'am. Please unmute your mic.
yes, 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 yes. I hope you can hear me, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Everybody hear you.
yes, yeah, yeah. Our syllabus, our subject is understanding the Old Testament, and then we have quite a big syllabus there. We have altogether three, two section divided into two sections. One is about the Old Testament, and then the second section is about the historical, the socio-economic and religious background of Israel, the patriarchal times and all, where we have the pre-exilic period, that is about the patriarchal times. Then next we have the bondage, liberation and wilderness wandering, that is the Exodus event, the Israelite experiences. Then after that, after the wilderness wanderings, we have the occupation, how the Israelites occupied the land, the promised land. And as they stay in the promised land, while interacting with the other nations, they also learned for the formation. They also understood that they also need a monarchy, and therefore we will also see the formation of the state, the formation of the united monarchy, and after that we will also see about the divided, how the united monarchy was divided, the fall of the two kingdoms. And after that, in section number 5, the second part is the exilic period, how the exile happened, what are the reasons for that, and then what were the roles of the prophets in this exilic period. Then finally, we have the post-exilic period, that is about the return of the exilic people and reorganizing the temple, rebuilding the temple, and where we will also see about the role of the reformers, Ezra and Nehemiah. Then that after that, we will see the relationship, how the how the Old Testament is related to the joint, connected to the New Testament through the role of the liberators, like the Maccabean period. So that is the whole syllabus that we have. We may not be able to finish everything, as I said earlier, to see some of the important things, and the rest of it will be in the notes that will be sent to you in due course of time. Now, the first part is the general introduction to the Old Testament. The general introduction to the Old Testament. Now, here, uh, Bible. We all know what is Bible, right? Bible is derived from the old French word Bible, that is based on the Latin word Biblia, and even in Greek also, Biblia means book. Biblia means book. So this Bible refers to the scriptures of the Christian church, and it may also denote about the canon of the Jewish scriptures. At the end of this section, we also have the formation of the canon of the Old Testament, so we will come into that also. And this Hebrew Bible, Hebrew Old Testament, this is the Masoretic text. Masoretic text. That's the Hebrew Bible, and this is a collection of different books, and that is what we see today in our Hebrew Bible. In the Old Testament, we have altogether books consisting of history, the Pentateuch, where it consists of the laws. Then we have the historical books, the prophetical books, and then we also have the writings. Altogether, we have 39 books in our Masoretic text, or in our Hebrew Bible of the Old Testament. So, as I said, Hebrew Bible is divided mainly into three sections, major divisions of the Hebrew Old Testament. It is mainly divided into three sections. That is the law, and the law is called as the Torah. Torah is a Hebrew word, so Torah, and this is the basic core of Jewish and then the Hebrew scriptures. Now this Torah or the laws, or we often also call it as Pentateuch. Pentateuch. Penta means 5. So it is a section that consists of 5 books, that contains 5 books, and that is why we call as the Pentateuch. And the 5 books, they are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The first 5 books of the Old Testament. These are called as the Torah or the laws or the Pentateuch. Torah means laws, and then I hope we are all familiar with the word Torah or with the word laws. So that is the first section of the Hebrew Old Testament. And the second section is in Hebrew we call it as Nebiim. We call it as Nebiim. I will give you all these, so you will see that once you receive the notes. Now, Nebiim is again further divided into 2 sections. Nebiim means prophets. Okay, Nebiim means prophets. So it is divided into 2 sections. This one is the former prophets, and then the other one is the later prophets. The former prophets and the later prophets. Now, the former prophets consist of the historical books. The former prophets consist of the historical books. Now, what are the historical books then? They are Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. These are the historical books. Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. These are the historical books. So we call them as the former prophets. We call them as the. And the third section is the writings. No, sorry. The second part of the prophets. The second part of the prophetical writings, prophetical books, is the later prophets. The later prophets. Now these later prophets we have 3 major prophets and 12 minor prophets. All the prophetical books comes under this section. All the prophetical books comes under this section. So we have 3 major prophets, that is Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. These are the 3 major prophets. And then we have 12 minor prophets. We have 12 minor prophets, and all these books are there in the Bible itself, starting from Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. All these are the 12 prophets. So the second section of the Old Testament has 2 divisions, 2 sections. One is the former prophets, and in the former prophets we have the historical books, and in the second section we have the later prophets, and these are the prophetical books. And even in the prophetical books also, it is divided into 2 parts. One is the major prophets and the other one is the minor prophets. So major prophets we have 3: Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. And then the minor prophets are the 12 prophets that we have in the remaining 12 prophets that we have in the Hebrew Bible. So this is the second section, the second part of the Old Testament. Then we come to the third part of the Old Testament, the third division, and that we call as the writings. We call it as the writings. In Hebrew we call it as Ketubim. In Hebrew we call it Ketubim. Ketubim. That is what we call. And here these are books which are lately composed and also added to the Hebrew Bible. And these will include the book of Psalms, Job, Ruth, Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes, Lamentations, Esther, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, Chronicles. All these falls into the category of the writings. So these are the 3 major divisions of the Old Testament. These are the 3 major divisions. One is the law, that is the Pentateuch, and the second one is the prophets. And in the prophets, we have the latter prophets and then the former prophets. And the third section is the writings, or we call as the Ketubim. So that is all about the division of the major divisions of the Hebrew Old Testament. Now, coming to the difficulties in the in interpreting the Old Testament, the context is different for us. The context is different. Their context and our context is different. So, in order to interpret the in order to interpret the Bible, which was written in a different context, it is not very easy for us to interpret into our today's context. For example, the some of the practical difficulties may be their social setting, their political setting is little different, is different than the setting that we have. So these are some of the difficulties in interpreting the Old Testament. And then there is a patriarchal culture. Of course, in our society today also we have a patriarchal context, but then the patriarchal setup that they have is little different than the patriarchal setup context. So that is how it sometimes it becomes difficult for us in the process of our interpreting the Old Testament. And not only that, but then even the language is different. The original language, the Bible that we have today is not the original language, but then the original language goes back to Hebrew, to Aramaic, and then to Latin and all this. So we cannot go directly to the original language, and then that's how sometimes the interpretation, the language that is used in the Hebrew Bible, and then going to the original text, then sometimes there may be little differences in trying to understand the meaning of the text also. So these are some of the problems that we face: language, and also the sociological setting, the political setting. These are some of the differences that we have, where sometimes we may feel difficult to interpret or difficult to interpret the Bible. With that, we also will come to the transmission or the survey of the Masoretic text and the translations. The survey of the Old Testament, where we have the different translations. We have different translations, and then in the syllabus also we have the Masoretic text, and then we also have, I'm just trying to check the syllabus. Yeah, the Greek, Latin, Syriac, and also English. So we have different translations. The Masoretic text is the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew Old Testament. So we will try to see that. Now, until 70 AD, that is the fall of Jerusalem, the text of the Old Testament was corrupted. That means the Hebrew language, the text of the Old Testament was corrupted, which means many Hebrew Old Testaments were prevailing. Many Hebrew Old Testaments were there. There was no uniformity in the Hebrew Old Testament, in the language itself. And so they could not distinguish which one is the right. So when Christianity came, Christianity claimed the text of the Old Testament of Hebrew as theirs. So that is how they started their work and work out something with the differences in the grammar and also in the Old Testament text. Now, when we go to the original text of the Masoretic text, we will also see that in the beginning there was only the consonant. There was no vowels as such. So Hebrew was written only in the consonants, and then with that consonants only, they try to pronounce it. They try to pronounce the vocabularies. So that is how even in their grammar also, the language itself was corrupted, and then slowly they furnish that one, and then that is how we have what we have the Old Testament today, what we have the Masoretic text, the Hebrew Bible today. As I said, it was only a consonantal text. The Hebrew Bible was only a consonantal text, which means there was no vowels at all. It was only with the consonants in the Hebrew Old Testament. So there were a lot of problems. The Hebrew rabbis, the Hebrew teachers, they wanted to have one accepted text. So vowels, later on they added the vowels, and that is comes from the Hebrew word mashar, which means to hand down or transmit from one person or from one generation to the other. So it is the transmission of the text. Masoretic. Now, Masoretic or the Masoretes, this comes from the word masar, that is in Hebrew, and masar means to hand it over, to hand it down, or to transmit. So it is the transmission of the text. It is the transmission of the text. So the Masoretes are those who were involved in the transmission of the text. They were involved in the transmission of the text, and then in the transmission of the text, they tried to find the right text. They started the consonantal text, that is, and then there were also two groups among them. One group did not like the vowels. One group liked only the consonantal Bible, which consists only of the consonants. But the other group wanted to put the vowels in order to have a clear pronunciation. So that is how these two groups, they work separately, one without the consonants and one with the consonants. But then it was later found that it is better to have the vowels so that there should be a clear pronunciation. So it was only in the 6th or 7th AD vowels were officially accepted, and that is how we have the Masoretic text, the Hebrew Bible, along with the vowels. So that is one of the texts of the Hebrew Bible, or one of the translations, one of the manuscripts of the Hebrew Bible. Then the next one is we have the Septuagint, or we say the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint, and in short we also write it as LXX. LXX. In short we write it LXX, and that is the Septuagint, or say the Greek Old Testament, the Greek Old Testament. So there are many theories about the formation of the Septuagint. There are many theories about the formation of the Septuagint, and then in the process of the theories, the first one is the letter of Aristeas. The letter of Aristeas, and this was translated in the 2nd century BC during Ptolemy II, during the reign of Ptolemy II, and this is between 285 to 246 BC. Now here, this during the time of King Ptolemy II, he asked 72 scholars to translate the Hebrew Old Testament. He asked 72 scholars to translate the Hebrew Old Testament, and it was found that the translations were same. These 72 scholars, they came together and then they translated, and that is how they found that the translations were the same. So the 72 scholars were appointed by the high priest and the king, and then they translated the Bible into the Greek Old Testament. That's the first one. And then is the theory of Legarde. The theory of Legarde, Legarde. Legardde, Legardi. Now, in this theory, in the beginning, there was a proto-Septuagint. In the beginning, there was a proto-Septuagint, and the translation of the Septuagint comes from these translations, from the proto Septuagint. That means Septuagint is the LXX, the Greek Old Testament. So that is the second theory of translating the Hebrew Old Testament, into the Greek, which is called as the Septuagint or the Greek text. And then we have the theory of Thackeray. Thackeray, Thackeray, the theory of Thackeray. Now, according to him, that means Thackeray is a person, and according to his theory, Septuagint comes from the synagogue worship. Septuagint comes from the synagogue worship. That means in synagogue worship, recitations were used. In the synagogue worship, recitations were used. And of course, we are not very sure of how the translation comes, but by 3rd century BC, the LXX, the Septuagint, was already existing. So, according to the theory of Thackeray, he says that Septuagint or the LXX, the Greek Old Testament, comes from the synagogue worship. Now, in early Christianity, there were Greek-speaking people, and so this Greek Old Testament was used by the. That means in the early Christianity, instead of Hebrew, there were many people who could speak Greek instead of Hebrew, and therefore, for the sake of this group of people, the Greek Old Testament was written. So this was very beneficial for the Greek-speaking people of the Hebrews. So that is the third theory, the third theory, or say the third idea for the translation of the Greek Old Testament. Now there are also other translations referring to the Greek translations, and that is the Latin translation of the Old Testament. The Latin translation of. Now, here in the Latin translation, we call it also the Vulgate, 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 Vulgate. And here, Jerome, we all know Jerome commentary, and then this was written by Jerome, right? So Jerome is a scholar. In AD 382, he started to translate, and he based his translation in the Old Latin version. He started to translate the Bible, and then his translation was based on the Old Latin version. He wanted to make it more relevant, so he also visited Bethlehem in AD 396. He did not find satisfaction in his translation. Hence, from AD 396 onwards, he had to start translating directly from the Hebrew Old Testament. He searched for some other means in order to translate the Bible, but then, after going through different process, he was not satisfied in his translations. So finally, in AD 396, he had to start directly translating from the Hebrew Old Testament. That means the Masoretic text. So his work was recognized in AD 405, and in the process of his translations, he also sought the advices of the rabbis. He sought the advices of the teachers, and that is how it gained official acceptance as Vulgate in AD 7. And the Vulgate became universally popular. That means the Latin translations also became popular in due course of time. The work of Jerome, through the work of Jerome. So that is about the Latin translation, which also is called as the Vulgate, and this was done by Jerome. We also have the Syriac translations. Syriac translations of the Old Testament. Syriac translations of the Old Testament. And here, many people initiated the Syriac translation, but then we don't have an exact date for that. But this may have been existed in the 1st century AD. That is how scholars try to say that the Syriac translation of the Old Testament do not have a specific date for its translation, but it may be or it can be based in the 1st century AD. That is how scholars would try to talk about the Syriac translations of the Bible. Now, with that, we also have the final formation of the Hebrew Bible. We have the final formation of the Hebrew Bible in English, and that is what we see today. The Hebrew Bible that we have with us, that's the final form of the Bible, the final format, or say the final translation of the Bible. Now these the ancient versions, the Masoretic text, and also the Greek versions, the Syriac, Latin, all these I will give you a handout. I will give you a written material for you to go through, which will be easier for you to understand also. So I will give you that one along with the other notes. Now coming to the English versions and translations, the terms are loosely, in the English versions and translations, the terms are often loosely or used interchangeably, that there is a difference between versions and translations. Now a version, what is a version? Version is a translation which is authorized by an ecclesiastical body, involves a number of translators. Whereas translation is an unofficial rendering that may entail many translators, but more often it is the work of one or two persons. So that is the difference between version and translation. Version and translation. Version is a translation which is authorized by some ecclesiastical body or by a group of people, and normally that involves a number of translators coming together and then putting into one form. So the translators will bring their own versions, and then that is how the book is formed. Whereas translation, it is an unofficial process. It is an unofficial rendering where there may be many translators, but more often the translation is the work of one or two persons. The translation is more of one or two persons. So that's the difference between version and translations. And today we see many versions of the English Bible. Today we see many versions of the English Bible. We have a New Revised Standard Version, New English Bible, today's English version, Good News Bible. Then we have from the margin perspectives also, we have Dalit Bible, or that is how we have different versions of the Bible. But these are all the different versions are translated from the same text. text. But then the versions are different according to the needs of the people. That the they write according to the needs of the people. Contextually, they write sometimes, and that is how it becomes relevant for them. For example, today's English version, it is written in very simple English, and then in the language that is used in our context today, they write according to that, and that is how it becomes easier for people to read. It becomes easier for people to read and also to understand. No, so that is how different versions are there. Now there is a tendency, however, even in scholarly writings also, to speak of all these ancient translations as versions, and this convention tends to carry through the history of the English Bible, say up to the King James Version. And even though many of the early English Bibles, many of the early English Bibles, which are expressed in different versions. So that is how we have today. But in discussing the English Bibles in the 20th century, we also have to take note which are actually versions in the technical sense. Now, the English versions and translations, the English versions and the translations through 1952. Now, in 1952, the complete revised standard version, RSV, was published in 1952. And then this have been mandated to revise the KJV and also the American Standard Version, the King James versions and also the American Standard versions. Revised Standard Version was the work of the American scholars. The Revised Standard Version was the work of the American scholars who were able to use far more critically edited manuscripts than any of their predecessors. So the RSV was far closer to the literary excellence of the King James Version. The Revised Standard Version is more close to the original text. And when we say the original text, we are talking about the Masoretic text. We are talking about the Hebrew original text. Above all so the Revised Standard Version quickly gained a wide usage both in general church and also in many of the serious studies. And that is how even in the Senate family, the Senate recommends Revised Standard Version or the New Revised Standard Version to be used in our study purposes. And the English, since the publication of the RSV in 1952, there has also been an explosion of translations into the English language. So that is how there is a rapid growth of translation activity that includes demand for idiomatic popular translations, development of sophisticated linguistic and then translation theories, the need for translations which is suitable for study purposes like Bible study or popularization of the manuscripts, and some for the profitability of Bibles for commercial publishing houses. So that is how after the English version, after the translation since 1952, different versions of the Bible started. So the Bible translations tend to follow one or the other of two basic philosophies of translation, although they vary in the degrees and also in the consistencies. So these are the things. But then it is better for us to use the NRSV or the RSV because that leads us more to the literal translation, or say a better translation from the original text, because the other versions that we have today are contextual translations or contextual versions, where it is which can reach the language of the people. Of course, that is also important, that is also good. But then in our study purpose, in order to go deeper into the study of the Bible, then it is better for us to use the Bible, which has a more closer connection with the original text. But otherwise, you can use any kind of versions which you feel comfortable for your readings. But for our study purpose, it is better that we use the NRSV or the Revised Standard Version. So that is all about a brief survey of the Old Testament manuscripts, about the translations, where we have learned something about the Masoretic text, the Greek, the Latin, the Syriac, and also the English translations. And then further details will be given to you in due course of time. I prepare something for this one also, so I will send to you through the scepter office. Now, we come next to the Palestinian geography and also the important places in the ancient Near East. The Palestinian geography, the geography of Palestine, the geography of Palestine. Now, even for this one also, I am going to give you some notes regarding this geography of Palestine, but I will try to explain something even in the class also. The immediate land of the Bible, known as Canaan. The immediate land of the Bible is known as Canaan, Israel or Palestine. Canaan, Israel or Palestine. Land of the Bible. And then this is bordered by the eastern Mediterranean Sea. It is bordered by the eastern Mediterranean Sea. And it was here in an area which is not more than 150 miles from north and also to south, and then 75 miles from west to east. So it's a very small land. It's a very small land, because the area it says is from the north to the south it is only 150 miles, and then from the west to the east it is only 75 miles. So that's a very small area. But then we will see that in this very small area, a lot of history happened. A lot of history happened. Most of the Hebrew Bible was written, and most of the events it relate of the Hebrew Bible that is written, and also the events that we see in the Hebrew Bible happened in this very small place. Geographically and historically, the heartland of the Bible was merely a very small part of a vast area which is known today as the Middle East. Today it is known as the Middle East. But then during those times it was it is known as the land of Canaan, the land of Israel or Palestine, and that is geographically a very small place which is in the heartland of a very vast land. Now the ancient Near East, it is generally characterized as the ancient Near East. It is generally characterized as the ancient Near East. So the ancient Near East embraced Asia. The ancient Near East is embraced as Southwest Asia, along with the lesser sections like the northeastern part of Africa and also the southeastern part of Europe, where three continental land masses meet together, and it is shaped by a large body of water. So it is the whole of this ancient Near East that forms the proper horizon for the proper horizon of the biblical Israel. So that is a small introduction or small background in order to learn the history of or the geography of Palestine. Now, as I said, Palestine is a very insignificant land. It is a very insignificant area in the Old Testament. A very insignificant area. In the Old Testament, it is also referred with an expression, it is from Dan to Beersheba. From Dan to Beersheba, which means Dan is in the north and then Beersheba is in the south. If you look into the map also, you will see that it is just a small land. So in the north you will see that it is Dan, and then in the south it is Beersheba, and then from north to south it is only 150 miles, as I said. So it is a small place, and sometimes it is also referred as from Dan to Beersheba. In other words, it includes the territory that stretches from Dan to the Jordan to the north, and Beersheba to the northern part of the Negev desert, which is in the southern part. So it is a very small. The boundary, if we look into the boundaries, then in the western side, the Mediterranean Sea is there. In the western side, the Mediterranean Sea. Then in the eastern side, we have the Jordan River, which is about 50 kilometers in the northern part of the country. So the land itself is very small, and under ordinary conditions, one would also expect that this area is said to be politically organized under some central authority. But it has not been done so because of the lack of natural boundaries. The land itself is very small, but it doesn't have any natural boundaries against the surrounding countries. So that is how this land doesn't come particularly or specifically under a organized sector. We come to the physical structures. The physical structure of the geography of Palestine. The physical structure of the geography of Palestine. The physical structure of the region explains the historical lack of political unity, because it is merely a small region. It is merely a small region, fragmented, and therefore it is very difficult to properly explain about the political unity of this very specific place. The land by nature is divided by mountainous characters into small units, and so that is how it is very difficult for us to give a specific explanation about the physical structure of Palestine. Now, Palestine, most of the time, this is exposed to different attacks from the neighboring regions, because in one side Egypt is there, on the other side Mesopotamia or the Asia Minor is there, and Palestine comes in between. One side there is Egypt, and the other side there is the Mesopotamian region, or say the Asia Minor. So, and then in between, Palestine is squeezed in between these two powerful nations. So when the land itself is squeezed between these two powerful nations, this small land is exposed to different kinds of attacks from time to time. It is a place which the two powerful nations wants to occupy. So when the two powerful nations wants to occupy this place, time to time there are different attacks. So the country itself is not very stable. It is not very stable. So the land of Palestine. We also know that it is a fertile land. It is a fertile land. So when it is a fertile land, both the nations, they would like to occupy, all the fertile land, the rich life of Canaan. So that is how the two nations, time to time, they fight, and then the land of Palestine is always in trouble. That's the physical structure that we will see. You can refer to Deuteronomy chapter 26. Deuteronomy chapter 26, where you will find about the land of Canaan as a rich, the very fertile land. Now, the land is divided into, Palestine is a very small place. It's a small country that is in between, squeezed in between Egypt and Mesopotamia. And the land itself is a very fertile land, and therefore the two nations, they keep on fighting for this land time to time. So the land of Palestine is not a very peaceful land. Time to time they are exposed to different kinds of attacks from the neighboring powers, from the neighboring powerful nations. And the land of Palestine as a very fertile area, which is also called as a very rich land of rich life, land of Canaan, a fertile land, or say sometimes we also call it as the Fertile Crescent. And those things you will find in Deuteronomy chapter 26, verse 9, and also even in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 7 to 10. So there you will see about this, the land of Palestine called as a fertile land. Coming to the division of the land is divided into 4 major regions. The land of Palestine, although it's a very small land, it is divided into 4 major divisions. One is the highlands. Or the highlands, which is in the western part of Jordan, the Galilean hills that rises at Mount Tabor, to the southern part of the plain of Jezreel. So the highland, which is in the western part of Jordan, the southern highlands, this rises in places to over 3,000 feet. That's the first division of the land. It is about the highlands, which is in the western part of Jordan. The Galilean hills at Mount Tabor, and then the southern part of the plain of Jezreel. So that is the first region of Palestine, and then the second region is to the western side. To the western side, the hill slopes more gently towards the coastal plains. It goes towards the coastal plains, and this lowers the hills where they have rich valleys, that are rich in food grains with vineyards and olive groves on the hillsides. So that's the second part. That's the second region of the land of Palestine. Then the third region is the eastern part. To the east, there is a land by steep valleys to the Jordan, that is below the sea level, 700 feet below the sea level at the Sea of Galilee, and also over 1,200 feet below the Dead Sea. This is the eastern part. And this valley is very deep, and at the same time it's very hot. But they have perpetual springs. And then this provides the place as a useful area, of fertile. So that's the. Please unmute your mic. Sorry, please mute your mic. Yeah. So that's how in the eastern part, The valley is very hot. Uh, Although it's very hot, they have perpetual springs, and these springs provides useful areas for fertile land. The fourth region, the fourth region is the plateau which lies beyond the river Jordan. The plateau which lies beyond the river Jordan. So this plateau which lies beyond the river Jordan, this runs through a very deep valley, and this stretches out into the desert, and we call that as the Transjordan Highlands. The Transjordan Highlands. So these are the four major divisions of the geography of Palestine. The four major divisions in the physical structure of the geography of Palestine. Four regions, which is in the western part of Jordan. Then to the western side there is the coastal plains, and to the eastern side there is the steep valleys to the river Jordan. And then in the fourth place, in the fourth region is the Transjordan Highlands or the Transjordan valleys. So these are the four specific regions of on the physical structure of the geography of Palestine. With that we come to the climate and fertility. Now the land itself is called as a fertile crescent. If we look the climate of Palestine, firstly we can see the water supply. Now the climate is subtropical with two contrasted seasons. It has two contrasted seasons, that is summer season and a vital period of rain during the winter months. So they have dry summer and then wet winter. So these are the two major seasons that we will find in the land of Palestine. Now the rainy season begins with some light rain in the month of September or October. They call this as the early rain, and then this stops by the month of March or April, which they call it as the late rain. So winter month is a wet month. It is a rainy season. Now the actual rainy season extends from the month of November to February. The month of November to February is a rainy season, and in many parts of the country this winter rain is sufficient to grow vegetations, and also it allows them to do agricultural works because of the efficient rain. Because of the rain that they get, they are able to do any kind of cultivation, any kind of agricultural works. Then after the winter months, this is followed by from May to September the weather is very dry, and that is the summer season, the dry summer month. From May to September the weather is very dry, and normally the annual vegetation, the vegetations also, it dries away, leaving only a few trees or leaving only a few shrubs. The rest of the vegetation dies away because there is no enough rain. So during this time they will use some kind of artificial irrigation facilities, like the water supply, the water that they have accumulated, they have collected during the winter months, during the rainy season. These they use it for their irrigational works. So artificial irrigational works are done through the water supplies that they have collected, or they have kept it during the rainy season. Now during this time, during the summer months, dry summer season, it is very hot. The heat during this period is somewhat tempered in places by western winds, so that the vegetation had to depend abundant dew. So it differs from place to place. Although it's a dry summer season, in some places they may get something, they may get dew, which makes them to allow for vegetations. Otherwise, it is very dry the whole of this summer season. Now, in the years when rains do not come, the agriculture is based on the existence of artificially collected rainwater, or on the water that is derived from the natural springs or from the rivers. Otherwise, they don't have enough or sufficient water for their vegetation for doing their agricultural work during the summer months. The second part is the climate and the fertility, is the flora and fauna. The flora and fauna. Now, with the intervention of human beings, the forests are cut down, and then they make room for cultivable fields, and that is how deforestation is very much done in the area. Now, this has happened in the region of Palestine in the historical times. The consequences of this process result in the erosion of soil in the forest during the rainy season, because for their agricultural works, for their cultivation, they have to cut down the trees, they have to cut down the forest, clean it, and then use it for their cultivations. And when this happens during the rainy season, soil erosion starts. Because of the rain, landslides, or a portion of the land is carried away by water because of the flood. So all these things happens. So the deforestation, the consequences of this deforestation results in the erosion of soil in the forest during the rainy seasons. Moreover, due to the deforestation, animals such as lions and leopards are also disturbed, and then this results in the extinction of the species. So that is about the flora and fauna, where human encroachment by human beings makes the soil to erode, and also deforestation, extinction of the species. All this happens because of the encroachment by the human beings. But without that encroachment, human beings also cannot survive, because they need a space for cultivating, for their livelihood. So that is we can say that it is they go hand in hand, because human beings also need a place for their cultivation, and when it is done, it destroys the land, it destroys the animals, extinction of the species. But on the other hand, if they want to preserve these forests, and if they want to preserve these animals and all, then they will not have a land for their cultivation. So that is how, even for the human beings also, it is difficult, and then that affects even the natural resources, or that affects even the livelihood of the animals. So that is all about the climate and fertility of the land of Palestine. Now we come to the economy. When we come to the economy, then in regard to cultivation, the mountainous areas were also capable of supplying the needs of these agricultural people, of these farmers. But the same number of individuals are in the valleys. Hardly the same relative numbers of individuals are in the valleys or plains. That means many of the people live in the mountainous areas, and then these places becomes capable of supplying the needs of the farmer population or the cultivators. For some reasons of health and possibly with a view to defense the inhabitants or the people, they appear to have lived in the hinterlands, where they farmed on the ridges of the valleys, because if they are on the ridges of the valleys, if they live there, then it's a kind of defense even for them also, because time to time they are attacked by the neighboring powerful nations. So when this kind of attack comes, then if they are in the hinterlands, then they are somehow saved. They are able to save themselves. But if they are in the plain areas, then it is not safe for them, because when these powerful nations come and attack them, they have nowhere to go, and then that is how everything will be destroyed. So many of the mountainous areas were occupied by the farmers or by the agricultural people. Now, in all parts country, people depend on agriculture. In all parts of the country, people depend on agriculture, and their chief important crops were cereals, barley, and wheat. Important groups were the cereals, like particularly barley and wheat. They cultivated in their fields. However, there was also a considerable production of wine, that is with the by having these orchards, olives, which are more profitable and cultivated in the mountain slopes. And they also cultivated dates, dates, dates. Barley and wheat are grown in the valleys, especially barley and wheat were grown in the Jezreel and also in the coastal plains. So outside the areas around each village, they have a pasturage for the flocks, for the herds, because they have cattle rearing. So in each of the village, around the village, outside the village, they have the cultivated areas, and also they have the pasturage for their flocks or their herds, for their cattle. Now, a special variety of animal husbandry that they do was that is nomadism. Nomadism was practiced. And what is nomadism? That means they are nomadic people. They travel from one place to another. The entire family or the entire clan or the entire tribe, they concentrate on the herds of the animals. So today or for this month or for this week, they will stay in one specific place where they have enough pasturage for their cattle. Once this is over, then they move to another place in search of another pasturage for their flocks, for their cattle. So they practice nomadism, nomads, moving from one place to another without having a specific place to stay. No proper settlement in one place, but then they move around from one place to another. So their occupation becomes either wholly or partially excluded. Their occupation in some of the areas, of course, they stay because they have to cultivate in the lands. They have to cultivate in the lands. They cultivate wheat, barley, and also they have olives, dates, and all this. So when they have these, then they stay in that specific place. But then when they have these flocks and all, big herds, then they have to go in search of pasturage. And that is how, for these people, again, they don't have a specific place to stay, but then they move around from one place to another in search of pasturage for their flocks or for their herds or cattle. So that is about the demography and then the economy of the geography of Palestine. Finally, we come to the way of life, the society. and their way of life. Their society and their way of life. The fundamental agricultural structure in Palestine is to produce a society which is broadly, broadly speaking homogeneous. Theirs is a homogeneous society without significant class distinction. Their society is an egalitarian society. That means they don't have any class distinction, high class, low class. They don't have any class distinction as such, but everybody is equal. They have only one class, one group of people, a homogeneous group of people. Therefore, scholars also say that theirs is an agricultural society in which the peasants, the farmers, they own their land, they dwell in their villages. So they have a homogeneous group, an egalitarian society where the farmers, they have their own land, they cultivate in their own lands, and then they live in the villages without having any contact with the urban culture. And that is how they develop an egalitarian ideology. Egalitarian, where everybody is equal. They share everything together. The rich and the poor, they all live together. They share one another whatever they have. So that is the kind of society that they had during that time. And according to such an ideology, according to an egalitarian ideology, all the members of such a society are, in principle, they're all equal. They're equal, all equal. There is no class distinction at all. But we may say that no egalitarian socio-economic structure has characterized Palestine within the last 5,000 years or so. It is about their society, about their way of life. Now coming to the trade. Every town in the countryside of Palestine, they produce pottery. Sir,
I am
that
Shekhar
means
from Tamil Nadu.
They produce pottery. They were
Hello.
very good. They were very good in making pots. So they do that, and some qualities were made, were molded by the Palestinians, and therefore they use this as a trade. They use this as trade goods in order to trade with the neighboring nations. Now the land of Palestine, this is in between Egypt and Mesopotamia, and that is how the land itself becomes a trade center, a commercial center for the neighboring nations. So when the land of Palestine becomes a commercial center, then they are also benefited a lot, because whatever they produce, that is traded with the neighboring nations. And then they also get, the Palestinian people also get something from the neighboring nations. They exchange it, and that is how they help other. Now, in their trading system, foodstuffs were not traded. But the most commonly traded items or traded goods were metals, gemstones. These were traded. So Palestine was an important trade route between the countries like Egypt and then the Mesopotamian region. So that is how the land of Palestine becomes a trading center, a commercial center, which makes even the neighboring nations also to bring whatever they have, and then they exchange it. But in trading the goods, foodstuffs were not traded. That we need to understand. Foodstuffs were not traded. So that is all about the geography of Palestine. The geography of Palestine, where we have learned about the physical structure and conditions, their economy, their social way of life, where we also learned a little bit about their economy, about their trade and commerce with the neighboring nations. So the very geographical position of Palestine makes very obvious that it would be extremely unlikely for the region to have an opportunity to develop as an independent culture. So that we should expect the society in the land of Palestine generally influenced by foreign impulses and cultural features. It is in the middle, in between the powerful nations. So they're often disturbed by these powerful nations. At the same time, they also try to adapt even their cultural practices also. So they don't have a specific culture of their own because of the influence by the neighboring nations, with Egypt on one side and Mesopotamia on the other side. And what we call the land in between these two powerful nations is, we also call it as the Fertile Crescent. Fertile Crescent. And as I said at the beginning, that it is also called as the land from Dan to Beersheba. From Dan to Beersheba, because we see that from the north to the south it is only 150 miles, and then from the east to the west it is only 50 miles. Now, even though the land is very small in its proportion, the importance of it is immensely historical. The importance, although the land is very small, it is very, very important, the place, because many of the histories happened in this very place. So that is all about the geography of Palestine. I hope everybody is clear with that.
Yes,
Yeah, ma'am.
Okay. Then
Thank you, ma'am.
yes,
ma'am.
thank you. Yeah, we have the formation of the individual books. I think we don't need to see much about the formation of the individual books, but the formation of the Old Testament canon, we will see that. Why I give importance to this chapter is because this is something which we don't see much, we don't learn much, right, in the process of our learning, because from the second section onwards, it is about the background of the different periods. Like we will be looking into the history of Israel, about the patriarchal times, and then the Exodus, the wilderness, and these are what we often hear about, and we have many times read about all these in the Bible, in the biblical stories from our Sunday school times onwards. So that is why I may not spend much time on from the second section onwards, but the first section I'm spending more time here because I feel that we don't have many, you may not have many materials to read this one or to go through this section. That is why I have emphasized on this so much. Now, we will stop here for the morning session, and in the afternoon when we come back, I will try to do a little bit on the formation of the canon of the Old Testament, and after that, very quickly, I will go through the rest of these, the remaining of the syllabus. Is that okay? Is that okay with you all?
Good morning, sir.
Okay, ma'am.
Share your notes, madam.
Fine.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, ma'am.
we started only at 7:30. So yeah, we started
Thank
only
you
at
so much.
7:30.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Excuse ma'am,
Yes.
I am from Tamil Nadu, Gnanasekar. Still I am not registered in my name, ma'am.
Okay, that you may have to contact the office. Okay, I am just coming as a guest lecturer, so please inform the sector office. Okay, I think they are here. Yes.
Ma'am, I have one question.
Yes.
Hello. Ma'am,
Yes.
apart from the notes, if we want to do some reference reading, whatever is given in the bibliography, is that enough, or will you suggest some reference reading also?
Oh yes. I will also suggest some readings. I will give that in the evening session. Okay, when we come back in the evening session, I will give you some of the books which will be easy for you to read also, and then you can get even from the internet also those books. So I will suggest.
Sorry, ma'am. I
Yeah,
live in Calcutta only. So is it possible also to use some library reference in
Yes,
Bishop's
yes,
College
yes.
or Scepter or Ravensshire? And
Yes, yes.
are we allowed to do so?
Yes, you
Okay,
can
thank
do
you,
it.
ma'am.
You can do it. You can come to the Scepter also, and then there is a library, so you can make use of the Scepter books there, Scepter Library, and then you can even go to Bishop's College Library. You can come even to Serampore College also to refer books. Okay,
Thank you,
you are
ma'am.
free to
Thank
do
you.
that. Yeah, you can do that, and then even the others also. Even the others also. If there is